We got with us right now Bloomberg News entertainment reporter Chris Palmeri in our LA bureau. Also with us, we have Bloomberg Wall Street Week host David Westin. He's in the Interactive Brokers studio with us right now. David was former president of ABC News from 1997 through 2010, and before that, he was president of the ABC Television Network and general counsel of the parent company, Capital Cities ABC. Good to have you both with us. Chris, I want to start with you. Just give us the news here and what we know so far.
Well, there's some interested parties now in buying ABC, the network, and its 8 local stations, which are big markets, Los Angeles, ABC, and in New York, for example. And so it's Nexstar, which is the largest owner of local stations, is one of the parties that's held preliminary talks. We also have heard that Byron Allen, who owns the Weather Channel and a bunch of other local stations, has expressed interest as well. So we're far from a deal, it seems. Disney seems to have trouble making up its mind whether it really wants to go forward with this, but there are people interested.
Chris, can you talk about how likely anything like this would be to go through as well? I mean, we've seen an FTC that's incredibly reactive, I suppose, proactive at the moment. I mean, is antitrust kind of a concern here, or is that something?
Big concern. I mean, they essentially didn't let an acquisition of a local station owner, Tegna, go through earlier this year. That was a sale to private equity, so really no traditional sort of overlap and antitrust issues. Whether that would be a cause. I mean, if you had an ABC would, in this scenario with Nexstar, for example, own CBS affiliates and NBC affiliates, Fox affiliates, whether all those local those networks would be happy about being owned by ABC remains to be seen. So, yeah, that's a big concern.
I want to bring in David Westin, host of Bloomberg Wall Street Week. As I mentioned, former president of ABC News from 1997 through 2010. Spent years also as president of the ABC Television Network. David, you've spent a lot of time at ABC, you spent a lot of time at Disney. If this were to go through, would it be the end of an era?
Yeah, but that era may have ended anyway. I mean, streaming sort of has changed an awful lot of eras. And I think to some extent, all the media companies are trying to figure out what the new era is, not whether we're going to continue the old one. I mean, look at the bundle that's gone away. I must say, I'm not shocked that they're thinking about it. To say they're thinking about it is not to say they're going to do it. When Bob gave that interview and said everything's on the table, and everybody was, oh my goodness, how could he say that? Well, he wouldn't be doing his job if he weren't willing to consider everything, because I think the really turmoil and upset in the media business is just that profound. And if you're a CEO, you should be looking at all the options. So it doesn't surprise me to look at it. It would be quite a big deal, and there'd be a lot of complexity to it. But if it makes business sense, you can get past a lot of complexity.
Yeah, David, you said you're not surprised that this is something Disney may be looking at. Are you surprised it's something that they may be looking at with Nexstar specifically?
Well, it depends on whether their check can clear and how big the check is, right? I mean, let's be frank. This is business. This is not personal, and you'd want that out of any CEO and any board of directors. They're taking a look at what makes sense from a business point of view, and they have to assess things like what are the growth potential for the assets that they're thinking about getting rid of, whatever those assets are, and also are they likely to be of more value in somebody else's hands than in their hands, or is it at least likely that the other person will perceive that they're of more value than they would be in Disney's hands? So those are the things you have to go through.
Chris, in terms of the Disney's push to streaming, not just with Hulu, but of course Disney Plus, ESPN Plus, and the like, how important is this division to that, or is it, since it's live news and local stations, not that important?
Well, Iger has indicated it's not that important. You certainly could make an argument that it's to keep it. I mean, it is profitable at this point. You have so much synergies you can do. There's big sporting events that run on ABC and ESPN. Obviously, the shows that starred or run on ABC can also run on Hulu and other streaming services. So this has been the model that all of these big media companies have been doing, is sort of putting the same content on different platforms. But I think Bob has indicated that traditional media company model, which is shrinking so sharply, it might be just better to just part with it at this point.
Yeah, but at the same time, if the traditional media model is sort of ending, David, I'd love to get your views on this. Nexstar has been going out and acquiring bunches, lots and lots of stations. Also launched News Nation, a cable news channel. I mean,
It's an enormous number of stations. I do think it's probably helpful. I'd be curious what Chris thinks about this. To go back, I was there when Disney, it was at that point, sold the ABC radio business, which was a big business in radio. And I was there and talking with Bob and talking with the people involved. By the way, it involved Tom Staggs and Kevin Mayer, the people who are there with him now. And they decided basically either they had to really double down and go bigger and invest, or they needed to get out because there was huge consolidation going on in radio. Television's not radio, but it sure is starting to rhyme with it. When you get an Nexstar that has that many television stations, I mean, I never would have dreamed of a world where anybody could own that many television stations. So the question is that the future of television? It doesn't go away. Radio didn't go away. It's just that they added a lot more stations. Well, exactly, but they added a lot more stations and they consolidated. They stripped out a lot of costs and they tried to make it up by selling in bulk the advertising. So you have a lot of advertising units across a lot of properties. And the question is that a model now for television stations?
Okay, let's talk numbers. Go ahead, Chris.
Point. Yeah, I was going to notice at Capital Cities, which is how Disney acquired ABC, also owned a lot of newspapers, and they sold them off. And I don't think anybody would dispute that was a smart decision. So, those legacy media businesses can lose their value pretty quickly over time.
Yeah, as Chris says, they're still profitable, but the question is the margin. I remember, this is, I don't think indiscreet at this point, 20 years ago, when I first went to Cap Cities as the general counsel, seeing the presentation on the margins for the big owned stations in Los Angeles and in New York, and it was north of 50% margins.
Huge.
Oh, it was amazing. Now, I'm sure they're not getting that kind of margin now. They've still got a significant margin, but what's the margin going to be next year and 5 years from now and 10 years from now? I don't think it's going to be bigger.
I mean, there was no Facebook, there was no TikTok at that point. Google was just barely around at that point. Hey, Chris, what are the numbers we're talking about here? How much could the ABC stations, the network, be worth?
$4 billion is what our Bloomberg intelligence analysts came up with. That's based on about 7 times the EBITDA, which is around $570 million. That number was a big surprise to me. Disney doesn't break out the broadcast business anymore, but I can remember it being an $800 million to $1 billion business, not too many years ago, pretty consistently as well. So it's almost halved.
Well, as my dad always says, something is only worth what someone else is going to pay for it.
Yeah, and you also have to ask after tax. Now, they can get around things, but one of the issues when you do a deal like this is the basis in these things is like nothing. And so that's a lot of taxes to pay. They got to be figuring out a way to get around it. And by the way, with the new money for the IRS, they're clamping down, right, on some of the spinoff situations.
Oh, interesting.
So it might make it difficult. I'm not saying they can't get past it, but I'll guarantee you, if they're actually working on this, there are people working hard on that question.
So the lawyers are always the winners, David.
That's always true in life. Yeah, absolutely.
That is. Okay, so Chris, what else could be, David brought up Bob Iger's interview recently where he said everything is on the table here. We're just talking about the network and the ABC stations at this point. What else could Iger be shopping around?
Well, we know he's also looking for a minority partner in ESPN, and he's indicated that's probably going to be something along the lines of a technology provider. You can think in Apple or Google, somebody like that would have not just money, but sort of expertise at distributing this content in new platforms, because that's the direction they're going. There's going to be an online-only ESPN in the very near future. So that's happening. Right now the whole TV business is just in a real state of flux, and so they've got to figure out a way to make the Disney Plus and streaming businesses profitable. They've got to get their deal done with Comcast to buy the 1/3 of Hulu they're required to buy. So just a whole lot going on at Disney.
Hey, David, could you, just because you spent so much time there, talk a little bit about how things used to work with synergies when Disney released a movie? GMA would be all over it. The parks would. What was the machine?
My perception was when Disney bought Cap Cities ABC, Michael Eisner ran Disney, and Michael made he had committees for synergy, and he talked about synergy all the time, and he got resistance everywhere he looked. Bob, one of the things that's underestimated about Bob is he came in and with really a velvet glove got the synergies done. And behind the scenes, he's the one who actually got synergies done, and he was great at it because he didn't demand it the way Michael did. He didn't bully you. He just sort of cajoled and had some people look at it, and they did a terrific job. It was a terrific job.
I mean, from the perspective of like a Star Wars movie or something comes out, there are Star Wars themed rides across parks now. You would see it promoted on Good Morning America.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that would be gone. Some of that would be gone.
Well, it depends on what the deal says.
Yeah.
When they sold the ABC radio networks, ABC News Radio continued with Disney, and they had a long-term deal with the buyer to make sure they took the programming. You can work around a lot of those issues with contractual provisions. But yeah, you'd lose some of the synergies, I'm sure.
That's so interesting. And I guess it's interesting as well as a lot of this stuff goes to these more consumer accessible plays, like what synergies have completely gone away as well, no longer exist in the business anymore too.
Yeah, that's a good point. Hey, Chris, just before we let you go, just give us an update on the Bob Iger turnaround.
Oof, still a work in progress.
Still a work in progress.
Yeah, I think he's I don't know if he's necessarily having second thoughts of coming back, but he probably should be. It's been a rough year and a half now since he returned, so.
Well, he's got his work cut out for him.
I'm rooting for him, but he's a friend, so I've got an interest in it. I want him to do well.
Thank you for the disclosure, David Westin. Hey, a big thank you to both of you also for joining us. Chris, congratulations to you and Thomas Buckley on breaking this news. Shares of Disney higher by 1.4% right now. Also seeing shares of Nexstar higher. Chris Palmeri, entertainment reporter for Bloomberg News. David Westin, he is the host of Bloomberg Wall Street Week, also former president of ABC News, and he was president of the ABC Television Network and general counsel of the parent company, Capital Cities ABC.